That's huge.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. If I could ask you all to silence your cell phones. Someone on cue, is that right? Right. That would be great. Oh. Oh, that is important. That is important. So I am, are we all set?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Martha Mock, and I'm the director of the Center on Disability and Education here at the Warner School of Education at the University of Rochester. Welcome. A few housekeeping items before we begin. While there is no schedule break during our time together this afternoon, feel free to get up, do what you need to do. Restrooms are on this floor. They're marked women's to the left, men's to the right. We have a gender-neutral bathroom on the first floor where you likely might have come in as well. So please help yourself to refreshments. We also have a room on this floor if you need to lay down, and there's chairs and space within this room right off of the this viewing area if you need to lay down or rest in there as well. So on behalf of all of our sponsors of this event, we wanted to welcome you here today. I would also like to thank Andre Marquis. Andre, you want to give a wave? And Erica Crane and Susan Taylor Brown for bringing this to our attention, and thank them for helping to make this day happen today. Also want to thank ME Action and Terry Wilder for donating the license to allow us to show the film here today. In addition to the Warner School of Education, I want to thank our sponsors, 13 WAM, ABC, American Medical Women's Association, Center for Advocacy, Community Health, Education, and Diversity, University of Rochester Medical Center, Cornell Center for Enervating NeuroImmune Diseases, the Institute for Family, Department of Psychiatry, Rochester Now, Rochester Regional Health Center for Clinical Systems Biology, Strong Center for Developmental Disabilities, and the Center for Community Health and Prevention. And thanks to those that I may not have on this list who have also been part of this. Today is ME, CFS, and Fibromyalgia International Awareness Day. Or ME, as ME, as it is known, affects at least 1 million people and possibly as many as 2.5 million people in the U.S. However, an estimated 80 to 90% with ME go undiagnosed. 75% are female, but it also affects men and children. 25% are homebound, and on average, patients score more poorly on quality of life surveys than those with MS, stroke, diabetes, renal failure, lung disease, heart failure, and various cancers. Yet federal funding is drastically lower than other equally disabling and preventable diseases. As part of this day, we are also encouraging you to take pictures of yourself and others next to the posters and post on social media with a hashtag, hashtag millions missing, or hashtag can you see me now with ME capitalized. To draw attention to global Millions Missing campaign fighting for health equality for people with ME. There will be an opportunity to do this after the panel discussion. We're also fortunate to have a panel of researchers, caregivers, and patients. Please come today with us to share their knowledge, and we hope that you will stay after the film for that. For folks who are receiving CME credit, to ensure that you receive that credit, make sure you sign in at the table. And I need to also read a little blurb about that as part of this. The CME credits are being provided via the New York State Department of Health Clinical Education Initiative, CEI, who has a contract with the University of Rochester. Medical providers interested in claiming CME must follow the instructions on the information sheet we are giving you, which is available on the table. You can find the instruction sheet with the sign-in. If you need assistance, please don't hesitate to ask Mary or Val, who are at the table. You must sign the sign-in sheet today. If you don't sign the sign-in sheet, there's no proof that you have attended. It is very important for you to write legibly on the sheet. The CEI Resource Center must have this sign-in sheet in order to give the medical provider permission to print your certificate off the CEI student portal. Okay, thank you very much. Now, on to our award-winning film, Unrest, with Jennifer Bria, who chronicles her life with ME and her journey from patient to advocate to storyteller. For those of you that are joining us via the web, as you know, we do not have the rights to broadcast the film over the web, but you may find it on Netflix, Amazon, and many other streaming services. We will see you back here, if you're online, at approximately 4 o'clock to join in for our panel discussion. Thank you. You are sure. You're right in the middle.
Hey, nice to finally meet you. Oh, hey, we met at ICE. That's right, we did. Oh my goodness. It's terrible. Congratulations.
Oh, yes. Okay. Are we all set with the captions?
We're still working together. We can make a Yes,
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I want to turn it over now to Jennifer Johnson, who is a former ME patient and a 13 news anchor here in Rochester, and one of our sponsors.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. First of all, congratulations for being here. I know for some of you, getting up today, putting clothes on, being able to get here, being able to get to this building is a huge victory. And some of you will be paying for it. But thank you for being here, not only to hear from our experts here, but to show we have a community here in Rochester. I hope you get an opportunity to meet one another and maybe exchange some information, because gosh, when you meet someone who gets it, that means so much, doesn't it? So much. Yes, so much. Thank you to our experts too for being here. For maybe people who've been sick for decades, did you ever think that we would have a panel of experts who believe you, who want to help you? I know my journey started about 25 years ago. This was unthought of, unheard of. So thank you all for listening and for giving us a Saturday today. Why don't we just quickly go down panel here, quickly say your name and a little bit how you're associated with today's event.
Did you want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gordon Broderick. I'm now recently with Rochester Regional Health. We moved here about 2 years ago. Previous to that, I continued to work very closely with Dr. Nancy Klimas. But previous to that, I actually had my lab was located in Fort Lauderdale at Nova Southeastern, and prior to that, it was located at the University of Alberta in Canada. And I became involved in MECFS research in the early days, where it really wasn't even believed to be an illness at all. I sort of fell into it through a connection with Suzanne Vernon at the CDC when they were just completing the Wichita study. And they had collected some data, and so we are a computational biology group. We're integrative scientists, so what we're trying to do is collect the different pieces that are being studied by different labs and different researchers and see how they might all connect together to tell a story. And if we understand the narrative, then maybe we can redirect the story to a better ending. So that's how I sort of fell into it. And we now have a center for clinical systems biology at the Rochester General Hospital, where we're looking essentially at complex, very complex illnesses. And MECFS, unfortunately, is a poster child for poorly understood, complex, multifactorial illness. So that's me.
Hello, I'm Maureen Hanson. I'm at Cornell University in Ithaca. I'm the director of the Center for Enervating NeuroImmune Diseases, which is a center really devoted to MECFS. I'm also a principal investigator of the NIH MECFS Collaborative Research Center. I started working on the disease about 10 years ago after noticing that there are very few molecular biologists who are studying the disease. And the reason that I am interested in the disease is that I have a son who's been ill for 20 years. So we are now pursuing a number of different projects under the auspices of the center. And one of the projects the main theme of the Collaborative Research Center is that we'd like to understand the phenomenon of post-exertional malaise. And as part of the center, my colleague here, Dr. Betsy Keller, is our clinical core director, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Betsy Keller. I'm at Ithaca College, and I got involved with this illness by happenstance about 15 years ago when an acquaintance of mine asked me about doing a cardiopulmonary exercise test on her. It was a very highly unusual test. She described it. Had I ever heard of it? And I said, yeah, I've probably done 1,000 of them. And, why? And we talked about that. I did not realize that she was ill and actually had been in what she would describe as a remission at the time when we were crossing paths. And so the long story short is she came in and I tested her, and I immediately said after the test was done that, to my colleague, well, our equipment's out of calibration. So there's no way this can be this way. And lo and behold, and I don't need to tell you how much patients live on the internet, so it wasn't long before somebody else contacted me and said, I heard you did this, and 150 or 60 patients later, here we are. And I think it is described most often by practitioners and also by NIH as a complex, very complex disease. And my response to that is I see all these commonalities when I do these exertional tests on these individuals. To me, it's far less complex than what I'm seeing with these exertional tests. But how it manifests in each patient may vary, but ultimately the ability to produce energy is affected in very similar ways. So I kind of come at it from a different lens, which hopefully has been useful.
We're going to come back to that. Wait, more. We'll come back. Andre.
Hi, I'm Marquis. I'm a professor of counseling and development here at the Warner School, University of Rochester. And I have expertise in numerous types of psychotherapy. But the main reason I'm here is that I'm a caregiver of Erica Crane, who has severe ME. And so I'll bring those two perspectives with me today.
And this is Erica, who, by the way, helped organize today. I think she deserves a round of applause. We're going to start with you because we know maybe your time and energy is limited. Yeah. So as you talk a little bit about your connection today, you can tell us how your journey with ME and CFS began.
Yeah, so I'll try to stay as long as I can. In 2011, I was working in a hospital's outpatient mental health clinic full-time. We lived a pretty normal life. I volunteered. We had social outings 2 or 3 times a week. I hiked 12 to 15 miles a week and had lots of interests, etc. And in the fall of 2011, rather suddenly, I developed a case of shingles. And as I was getting over that, it's maybe 3 weeks into that, I was out of town and I developed some kind of flu-like illness. And right away, I knew that it was very different than any illness experience that I had ever had before. It felt like I had the flu, but it also felt like a button had been pushed. Something had subjectively changed in my experience. I had a high fever, swollen lymph nodes, just everything that you would kind of expect with a flu virus. But within about 24 hours, it felt like it had sort of influenced my central nervous system. So I had intense vertigo, a constant headache that I had for about 5 years without interruption. I lost 20 pounds and then pretty quickly lost 10 more. I thought I was dying. I thought I had some kind of terminal illness and that no one could figure out what it was. So for the first year, it was really scary. I was very lucky early on because about 3 months into my illness, I found a neurologist who was an expert in headache syndromes. And he was very helpful in that he suspected that the virus that I had influenced the progression of events. And he was able to kind of help me with my headaches, but also he did some labs on to see about Epstein-Barr virus, and those came back unusual. So I ended up going to an infectious disease doctor at Strong, who said that I had a reactivation of that virus and wanted to put me on antivirals. But he also said, by the way, I think that you might have something called CFS. I'm not, really familiar with it, but I think that you might have that. And so that sort of clued me into where I should start looking in the literature, because it was obvious that most of the doctors I'd seen previous to that hadn't heard of it or didn't think I, had it. So I ended up going to 2 different specialists. I'm currently being seen by Dr. Maria Vera at the Institute for NeuroImmune Medicine. I've had wonderful luck there. I'm so glad that I'm able to be there, but a lot of patients aren't able to have a specialist for care. And so that's sort of where I am today.
You mentioned you see 2 doctors. You mentioned Maria Vera. Is there another one?
I saw, earlier on, I also saw Sue Levine, who is based in New York City. She was also excellent. I ended up deciding to go to the Institute for NeuroImmune Medicine because in Florida, they were able to run a lot of tests that could all be done in the same place, and that really appealed to me. So that was very helpful because a lot of abnormalities came back, and it was helpful for me to bring back those test results to Rochester for my doctors here so that they could sort of begin coming up with a treatment plan that was, based in science and, so.
You mentioned 2011, and at that point, a lot of doctors still didn't know this existed, or perhaps didn't believe it existed. Choose. Why? Why do you think that here we are in 2018? People have been battling this for decades.
Yeah.
And we still, you say it, and people are like, huh?
Right.
Why do you think we're there?
Well, I think that there's several different reasons that that's the case. One is that this is fairly invisible. People are not going to see you on your bad days. As bad as I am today, this is not a bad day compared to most of my bad days. And
she spent 4 days laying completely in
Right.
bed preparing, and this will send her into a relapse for sure. So,
right. So the fact that no one can really see how sick patients get is a problem. But I also think that this is a larger problem. It's a social justice issue. It's a larger problem for a lot of chronic diseases that have a lot of invisible symptoms that people don't see on a daily basis. I'd love to see researchers who research different sort of diseases that fall into that category talk with one another, and patients talk with one another about that. I'm thinking like mast cell activation syndrome, which I also have, hypermobile EDS, POTS, neurally mediated hypotension, things like that. So the other reason why I think that this is not commonly accurately understood is because in the 80s, I really think that the dominant image of this disease sort of got hijacked. So when people think, so chronic fatigue syndrome was coined in the 80s. When people think chronic fatigue syndrome, they think tired. And when they think tired, they think, oh, you know, there's, you know, you kind of see somebody leaning over a cup of coffee after a couple of, you know, hard nights, yawning. And really, the image of this disease is more like, you know, somebody lying flat in bed, unable to lift their head off of the pillow, unable to get to the bathroom, rapidly losing weight, etc.
If I could just give my own 2 cents on this, and this is maybe another area we can get into sort of once you go over the science, but this is why I became a journalist, having been sick myself. And the feeling, I often called it an illness with a PR problem, right? What a terrible name, chronic fatigue syndrome, right? Whoever coined that, I just want to go back in history and slap across the face. But I remember back in 2006, feeling such a feeling of jubilation when I was able to talk my bosses, when I was still a journalist locally, I was at a different station at the time, into allowing me to go to Washington, D.C. to cover the news conference when the CDC was teaming up with the CFIDS Association and basically starting a PR campaign. This is to hear the CDC say, we believe this is true. And we realize that we have not done enough for these patients. We have let this population down. We need to do better for these patients. We need to do better for the people who care for them because they don't have the information. That's where I met Nancy Clemens. She was at that news conference. Mm-hmm. I was a journalist and I was trying to act professional, but I stood in the back of that room and I cried because it was finally validation from the top. So it was very disheartening in 2011 when I interviewed a young man who was wishing that he could travel to Washington to testify, but he was too sick. So somebody read his testimony for him. And basically it was testimony for a House subcommittee of people saying, patients saying, you failed us. And the CDC saying, yeah, we did. It was disappointing. But as a journalist, I got to cover that as well. But it's also hard to talk your bosses into, let's do a story about something that, doesn't really affect a lot of people, or so they think, because it is invisible. Mm-hmm. So I think there's been a lack of coverage in part because people don't see the numbers and who this impacts. And also we didn't necessarily have the support from the people who said that they would support it. But thank you. I know you're, again, tap out whenever you need.
Thanks.
Okay. We have such different levels of information probably in this room. Maybe some people who are just beginning their journey, maybe some people who've been at this game for decades now, and some of the folks who are putting their minds to it. For the folks who maybe are just beginning their journey, is there anything that you think needs to be added to the definition of what is this illness? Do you think there's something we've missed in terms of the symptoms? Anyone else feel like we need to build that baseline of information before we move on?
Well, I think there, in some ways, as I was talking to Gordon earlier, this idea that there's not a biomarker, but there really are, and I should let the scientists speak more to the details, but Erica's had her national killer cell function at 5%, and these very unusual patterns of cytokines and all this pro-inflammatory, so all this inflammation throughout the body. So I don't know if any of the scientists can briefly speak to, the PEM, the studies that you do, Dr. Keller. These things show very distinct abnormalities, correct?
They do. And, I guess if you don't want me to be on my soapbox for a second, one of the things that, if you're early on into this illness, one of the things that I would encourage you to really evaluate is the level of stressors in your life. And sometimes, we're so focused on targeting the symptoms and how to ameliorate the symptoms, get you better sleep, because that's huge for anything, for anybody, right? But also to think about the overall stress load on your body in terms of emotional stress, in terms of chemical stress, in terms of environmental stress, because you have an immune system that's in overdrive in the early stages. It's just trying to find what we call homeostasis, trying to get your body back to normal level of function, and it's failing. And so are there any things going on, stressors in your life that you can reduce? And so one example that I'll use is I've tested quite a few people from who've come from New York City, especially in the financial industry. Low stress, Wall Street folks, right? And but, oh, I've been doing this. I love living in New York City, and I've been doing this forever, and I'm good at it, except I can't add anymore. My colleagues are, correcting my errors on the trading room floor. So I think I need to address this problem. And when I suggest to them that New York City is a stressful place to live, noise stress, light stress, chemical stress, everything about it is stressful, they go, oh, but I've lived here forever, And I said, yeah, and you have no idea what this kind of load is on your system and how your immune system is reacting just to that. Forget the illness part of it. So if you can, reduce that to some extent, recognize it and find ways to reduce that and use the energy that you do have available to you for the things that you really want to do. I think that's a really important first step.
How do you do that, though? you give up your job,
so
you move your family?
In some cases, you do give up your job. And, I've tested some people 2 and 3 times have come back to me because, the first time I said, you should not be working. No more. And they, persisted. And then they're back to me a year and a half later. I need evidence of impairment and disability. Well, we had it last year. Well, I didn't use it. Now they say it's too old. And so it's a tragic story. But on the other hand, if you can do things like get a disabled placard for your car, and people always balk when I say that. I'm like, okay, waste your energy walking into the supermarket instead of being able to go out that night and watch movies with your friends. So pick and choose what you want to do. But the guidance that I provide over and over again is to try to live your life circularly instead of linearly. And linearly is what you've done all along before you got ill. Woke up in the morning, you did task A, B, C, D, E, maybe 10 tasks later, it was dinner time. No problem. Now you're ill. And recovery of following exertion is huge. So you wake up, you do task A. Maybe that's make your bed. I think you could probably ditch that one. Maybe getting some food in your mouth is a good first task. And then you recover from that. And once you're recovered from that, then you do task B. And maybe you have 2 tasks for the day. Maybe you have 3. Maybe you have 1, depending on the severity of your illness. But it's something, a little bit of a stressor, and then plenty of recovery, and then a little bit of a stressor and plenty of recovery. And try to reorganize your life in that way.
Are people these days, are they able to, if this is their illness, get disability? Are they able to prove I have a disability and the insurance company is saying, I believe you?
Yes. Yes, the CDC recognizes a cardiopulmonary exercise test as an acceptable laboratory indication for this illness, and it's on their website. So that's one way of showing impairment. And the way that we show impairment with this test protocol is that you don't recover normally. If you only do 1 test, I do the 2-day test protocol, which I know has controversy. And so my disclaimer, I would love to never, ever, ever do that test again in my life, because we have another way to find evidence of impairment or of the illness. And natural killer cells doesn't, it's good. It's very good, but we're not there to the point where we can say this is definitive for everybody, unfortunately. And it varies depending on where you're at in the disease status too. So when you can show that you fail to recover normally, because we do, it's a very reproducible test, then we can show objectively that there are problems with your physiology or your autonomic nervous system, your ventilatory function.
So people are on their journey or beginning their journey. Is this something that they can come and find you and go through this?
If they feel that they need that evidence, you know, and in some cases, depending on the level of your illness, then you may not need that evidence. But at some point, you know, they can do it. And I'm not advertising because I never have and I never will. Well, at least not in the near future. But you know, they come to me, and it's usually through a doctor or an attorney who have encouraged them to get this test, a tilt test, if you have dysautonomia or some kind of autonomic nervous system dysfunction, brain scan, and no cognitive assessment are usually the pieces of evidence that they're compiling from an attorney's perspective to help with the disability case. Getting Social Security disability tends to be easier than getting disability through your private insurer, for example, for a job that you work at.
Excuse me, Maureen, your story fascinates me. Someone with your background and then your personal relationship to this. What came first, the chicken or the egg for you in terms of your interest in this illness?
Well,
Your son or?
certainly it was my son's illness that inspired me to go to a scientific conference where I could see that unfortunately there weren't any molecular biologists at that conference, and very little work being done at the molecular level at that time. And after going to the second conference where there was very little molecular biology, I decided that I could make a contribution, and therefore I began to write grant proposals to obtain NIH funding and begin to do research on the illness.
I don't even know if I'm saying this right, but you have done research at microbiome. Am I saying that correct?
Right. One of the early studies we did was to study the gut microbiome to find out if it's different. And your tale of losing weight is a frequent tale that people have digestive issues with this illness. And so we did analyze the gut microbiome. Particularly, our initial study was on the bacterial microbiome to see if it was different in patients versus healthy individuals. And we did find that the collection of species present in the patients was different, significantly different than in the controls, and also they had less bacterial diversity. So, fewer different types of species, and many of the species that were absent were those ones that are anti-inflammatory, and there are more pro-inflammatory organisms present. So clearly there's abnormality in the gut microbiome. My own view is that it's not the cause of the disease, it's a result of whatever is causing the disease. But nevertheless, it is important because it's an illustration of the biological nature of the disease, which still there are physicians who have not accepted it as a biological illness. And so that was why it was important to do that work. And when the paper came out and the Cornell news office wrote a press release, it got picked up by 80 different news outlets. And there were headlines such as chronic fatigue syndrome is in your gut, not your head. And that's because there's still the stigma that it's all psychological when it isn't. And while I don't think it's all in your gut, nevertheless, it was useful for people to begin to realize this is a biological illness. It's not a psychological illness.
When was that?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. Oh, and follow up some of your research. And I don't know if I'm saying this correctly either, but metabolomics?
Right. Another type of research we're doing is to look at the metabolites in patients versus healthy individuals' blood, to look at differences that might occur in the metabolites, your metabolism, how is it different? And we have a published study indicating that there are significant differences between, again, patients and controls, and there's disturbance in fatty acid pathways, energy pathways. We have a study that's not yet published and submitted for publication in which we confirm those earlier results and extend them. And I think metabolomics is very helpful also to try to get at the pathways that are disrupted in the body. So I do think it's a very promising area of research in this disease.
Again, as something that is the cause of this, or something that is a side effect of it? Where do you think it is in the process?
Well, I again think it's not the underlying cause, but it certainly tells you a lot about what's going wrong. And I think we do need, even if we don't know the underlying cause, sometimes if you know things that are going wrong, you can try to find ways to fix, those abnormal aspects of biological function. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done on metabolomics, but I think it's probably telling us why some of the symptoms exist, but I don't think it's a fundamental cause either.
Okay. Gordon, systems biology, what is that?
It's become a buzzword, hasn't it? Unfortunately. It reminds me of artificial intelligence back in the 70s and 80s, where it was the greatest thing. And it was going to solve all of our problems. And so we had high hopes. And then, of course, HAL, the computer, came out and was going to run the world. And unfortunately, things didn't turn out the way we had hoped. AI got a black eye. And then in the scientific community, we couldn't talk about artificial intelligence for about 15 or 20 years. And we called it something else, machine learning, but only now is it becoming a little more fashionable to talk about that. So systems biology means a lot of different things. I can tell you what it means to us. It encompasses basically looking at the statistics of health, as well as the informatics of health, but it goes a step further in that it looks at the dynamics, how things change, how things are regulated dynamically. This is a controlled system. We get on a bike, we push the system. When we get off the bike, we don't stay there. Our control systems bring us back. You can think of it as like a thermostat in a house. I can open the window, the furnace will work a little bit harder, right? But then it'll work to keep the temperature constant. And then when I close the window, it will restore normal temperature. So that's the paradigm that we study as systems biologists, is looking at how all of these different components fit together. They do fit together. They work together. They work together to keep us healthy, to keep us functional, right? You can't say that I believe that we can't say that we have a metabolic problem without saying that you have an immune problem. For example, metabolism and immunity work together. Inflammation and metabolism work together at the molecular and cellular level. So because this is all connected, and think of the constellation of symptoms that ME/CFS patients face. I mean, that is evidence right there. Right, that it basically speaks to the fact that we all are connected together. These different components are all connected together, and the illness manifests in different ways. And it also changes. It's episodic, right? If it weren't a dynamic process, then you wouldn't have flare-ups. It would be a constant thing, right? So we study the dynamics of these different systems, how they connect together, and how they control one another, and how they essentially dance with one another. And our belief is that this system is complex enough that it adapts to different situations, to different insults, to different challenges. And that it is, if you can run a couple of hundred apps on your iPhone, this is much more sophisticated than an iPhone. So it can run different programs. It can adapt to different circumstances, to different insults, to different infectious insults, to different chemical insults, to different conditions of environmental stressors, all types of stressors, not just psychological stressors, but chemical, infectious. And it will respond by starting up different processes in the body that you don't normally use when you're in a healthy state. If you push all of these buttons at the wrong time or in the wrong sequence, you can start up a program that will essentially save your life, but you may get stuck there. And so that's our model of this illness, is that you were challenged by a combination of conditions that we also believe there's a big involvement of hormonal control, both stress hormones, but also sex hormones. That would relate to the fact that the presentation of the illness is quite different in men versus women. And so we're very interested in how different hormones, metabolic hormones, stress hormones, and sex hormones interact with the immune system and the central nervous system to start up and sustain different response programs that you might get stuck in. And then once you're stuck in this program, the rules are different. It's almost like switching playbooks halfway through the football game. Right? So now, what used to be up is down. And so if we understand the new rules of play and the new program that's being run, then perhaps we can disrupt it. Perhaps we can intervene in the conversation at the right point in the conversation, say the right things, and redirect that conversation towards a healthier state. And our belief is that we don't have to treat you all the way to your healthy state. That if we're doing the right things, we can bring you within the proximity of your healthy state, and your body should kick in and enable and bring you back to where you should be. If you get lost, if I take you to within a certain distance of home, you start recognizing landmarks, and then you say, okay, I know how to find my way home from here. So that's our premise, and we've been using computer programs or computer models of human physiology, of basic physiology, because we know quite a bit about how these things are connected. We don't know how quickly things change within the body necessarily, but we know how different proteins interact, how signals are exchanged between cells. We know a lot about that connectivity, a lot about the biochemistry of that, not necessarily the kinetics, but the biochemistry. So we can use that information to try and understand what programs can be run, and then try and run them in reverse. So essentially, that's what we're trying to do. So systems biology for us is very much about control. It's about regulation. It's about coordinated dynamics, coordinated response between these different parts of the body. In particular, hormonal control and immune control, because we believe that that is what has become imbalanced, has gone into an imbalanced state in ME/CFS.
Anyone else super excited that these minds are, here essentially in our community? I want to get back to the work that all of you are doing and find out if you guys need help, what we can do to support that work. But I want to hear about yours as well with psychotherapy, help, hindrance. What do you think?
Yeah, so first I want to stress that no psychotherapy is going to cure ME, because ME is not a psychological disorder. But good psychotherapy can help mitigate some of the adverse dynamics that many ME patients frequently experience. And as you saw, like with Jen Brea, I mean, the amount of loss that ME patients experience is profound. And it often increases every year, right? So it's not like you just have a death in the family, but each year you lose more and more capacity. So the grief is profound, the grief is cumulative. So, good psychotherapy deals with grief. It can also help, Erica was, a mental health counselor. She volunteered. She did all these things that gave her life meaning, and you're stripped from that. She didn't have the capacity to do that. So helping clients find or create meaning amidst their loss and suffering is a way that psychotherapy can help. In the realm of social justice, as an advocate, psychotherapists can help ME patients navigate a medical system that often marginalizes and psychopathologizes them. It is common for these patients to be misdiagnosed as having somatic symptom disorder. It can also help ME patients learn how to handle medical doctors who don't know anything about ME and who frequently belittle it. Mindfulness is something that can help almost any condition, from MS to cancer to ME/CFS. And again, it's not going to cure the disease, but it can help an individual relate to their disease and symptoms in a way that can ameliorate some of the suffering that goes along with it. And like anything that decreases stress, mindfulness can potentially lead to less systemic inflammation, and that can be helpful in many regards. There's a book that I would like to recommend to any of you who don't know about it. Toni Bernard wrote a book called How to Be Sick. She was a law professor who came down with a severe case of ME. She talks about a lot of mindfulness practices that help. She also talks about cultivating very spiritual virtues like gratitude and self-compassion. You could see the guilt that Jennifer Brea has, right? I can't be a good wife to you. I can't do these things. So helping them deal with their guilt and becoming, self-compassionate is something that psychotherapy can help. Unfortunately, it's my anecdotal experience that many psychotherapists may do more harm than good, even if this is very unintentional. First, again, I know that many psychotherapists misdiagnose this as somatic symptom disorder. The DSM-5 is the current manual that all mental health practitioners have to diagnose mental disorders out of, and I think it's partly or largely responsible for this. The head architect of the DSM-4 was Alan Francis, and he has been a highly outspoken and critical of the criteria for somatic symptom disorder, which basically allows for the misdiagnosis of any disease that doesn't have a really clear biomarker. Another huge problem is that in the realm of psychotherapy is that one of the most influential research studies recommended that a form of cognitive behavioral therapy and graded exercise were helpful to patients with CFS. This was called the PACE trial. It was a 600-person, $8 million study, and it was published in The Lancet, which is a highly regarded medical journal. But many mental health professionals do not know that the CDC and other organizations no longer recommend those interventions because of their potential for harming patients with ME. The PACE trial has been extensively critiqued by numerous experts in the fields of research methodology and statistical analyses. The biggest flaw, from my perspective, although I'm not an expert on this, but was in subject selection. But many people have said there were flaws at every level of the methodology. But with regard to subject selection, there are different diagnostic criteria sets with which over time people have been diagnosed with CFS or ME. And in this study, it definitely included many patients with fatiguing conditions other than ME, most notably depression. So exercise is extremely beneficial to people who are depressed.
Yes.
And exercise is harmful to patients with ME. So again, just to reiterate, one of those influential psychotherapy studies recommends graded exercise when in fact, because of the hallmark feature of intolerance to exercise, therapists are recommending treatments that are harmful. So without a critical reading of the literature, therapists are, potentially doing more harm than good. Lastly, I'll just say that here at the Warner School, U of R, one of our main missions is social justice, and a major injustice has been taking place for decades around ME/CFS. Patients have been told there's nothing physically wrong with them, and they've been given treatments that are harmful to them. So psychotherapy can help, and you have to be careful and know what you're talking about.
You just said without reading all the critical literature. This illness doesn't always pick Harvard PhD students like Jen, right? Some of us are just going, all right, I have this illness and I don't understand. First of all, I can't get past the first sentence because I can't focus on it. But once you get into this, you guys speak this medical language. A lot of us don't. So how are we supposed to read all of these, the latest research, right? When, quite frankly, we become pretty impressive experts, but still a lot of it is so over our head. So we need to be advocates at a time when we're limited. And Erica, I'm wondering for you, how have you been your best advocate? It seems like you have an amazing colleague, incredible, and to have an advocate like that who believes in you has to be huge.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that. Was there steps that you took on your journey that missteps that you learned from, or something you did that you said, I wish I could tell all patients X, Y, and Z?
Number one, I'm incredibly lucky because my family knew right away something was wrong. They never questioned that something was seriously wrong. And my husband never questioned that something was seriously wrong. He knew me beforehand, and
She was a dynamo, and went.
Yeah, it was very quick decline. So I've been very lucky in terms of having, especially his support. My own personality type, I think that one of the ways that I tried to cope with the illness in the beginning was to learn everything that I could about it. And so I ended up reading, 600 or 700 articles over the course of a couple of years. It took a while. I'm not able to do that anymore. I can't read very well anymore because unfortunately I'm coming into my 7th year with this, and every year I decline. And so it is very difficult to lose functioning on a yearly basis like that. But learning about it was a way for me to cope. There was something else I was going to say, and I can't remember what it was. What was the second part of the question?
I guess just what you had learned, your missteps.
Oh, missteps, that's right. So there is a big misstep that it really wasn't my fault because I wasn't diagnosed with the disease early enough, but in the first year of illness, when I didn't know what I had, I pushed myself incredibly hard, and I am 100% certain that I would not be as bad as I am today if I had been given the correct diagnosis earlier. So, for example, it's just very sad to me, about 9 months into the disease process, I started feeling better, and I had a partial remission. And the first thing I did was increase my hours at work because I had cut them back, and I bought an elliptical. And within 3 weeks, I had the worst relapse of my life and never recovered from it. And so I did major damage. And I think that if I had known what I was dealing with and had proper recommendations for treatment early on, how to pace, what to avoid, not to push yourself, that I would not be as sick as I am today.
Again, while we have you, we know your maybe energy and focus is limited, so I want to continue if we could. I have 2 questions that kind of go into one, and if you don't mind my asking, how do you stay realistic and hopeful? And the Millions Missing movement, what does it mean to you? I imagine maybe they have a little piece together there.
Yeah, it is a very difficult fine line to remain realistic and hopeful. And I vacillate, I have days when I feel very hopeless, and I have days when I feel very hopeful. It's really hard to, one of the things that I feel is especially hard is that we don't have, a lot of illnesses that are invisible don't tend to have the funding that they should have. And because they don't have the funding that they should have, research is slow, and treatments sometimes feel like they could be years and years away. And so I suppose that one of the ways that I try to remain hopeful is through the Millions Missing movement, having a way to improve awareness about this disease, I think, is really important in the community, because the community oftentimes doesn't understand this illness correctly. But also putting some pressure on governments across the world to increase funding, I think, will be really the only way that we move forward. And so the Millions Missing movement is actually taking place today. It was started in 2016 by ME Action, which is an organization that is sort of like a grassroots organization that tries to mobilize patients and advocates to improve health equality for this disease. I think that ME received something like $14 million this year from the government for funding. And just to give you an idea, MS received, I have it written down somewhere, it received somewhere around 115 million, and is half as common. And I don't say that to every bit of the money that MS is getting, they should get, and they probably should get more. But just to give you the idea of how little money is going into research for this is appalling. And I think that we really need to hold our government and the NIH accountable for fixing that wrong.
Does anyone know where that stands from a federal perspective? How much attention is being paid from the NIH or the CDC? Where do those outreach PR efforts stand?
Well, I mean, Francis Collins, who is the head of the NIH, is aware of ME/CFS. He wrote a blog about it last year, I believe. They just recently started a new research project to look at intensively at a small group of patients. The CDC recently updated their website, and so it's a great resource for any medical practitioner or patient, because they have taken off the recommendations for the type of CBT and graded exercise therapy that they had promoted in the past. The New York State Department of Health recently put up a website on myalgic encephalomyelitis. It's on their website. It's a page on their website that is an excellent resource. The health commissioner, Howard Zucker, recently, about a year ago this month, wrote a letter to all physicians in New York State about this disease. So I think that there are some places people can go to get an accurate understanding of an up-to-date, understanding of what's going on with this disease. I think that what's lacking is the funding.
Can I have one piece? Erica and I have been talking.
Can I say Susan Taylor Brown, who also helped organize today? So round of applause.
One of the biggest challenges for all of us in the room, and one of the things that Erica and I are very committed to doing, is we've really leveraged our privilege. I have been in the healthcare field through my whole career. I had to leave it because of ME. And in this community, we don't have any specialists who have expertise. So the amount of misinformation I've been given is incredible. And you can't run to Florida. I can't run to New York for everything that comes up. And equally, the labs here do not do a lot of the tests that we need. They then get sent out, and then you get incorrect results. So I will have a test run here, then have it run in New York and get different results. So I think what we also need to be advocating for is a treatment model that's very, very different, that the few handful, as Jennifer talked about, of people who have the expertise somehow connecting to physicians and other healthcare providers in the smaller communities, so that that information gets dispersed. And it's not. We've got a lot of specialists who are retiring or are very close, who have retired locally. And this is a huge challenge. So people go and say that they're having these issues, and they just say it doesn't matter. I was told many times by very caring professionals that it doesn't matter what basket we put you in. Well, all of you who know me, I was a very active athlete, and like you, I kept pushing. I no longer can ski, I can't ride horses, all these things I loved, and it's because I kept being told, oh, you just work back slowly. So I think that it wasn't malintent on providers' parts, it's a lack of information about what happens to you and how you relapse. And I said, I can't do things. And they just would say, you'll feel better. So I think that's another piece that we've got to start working into, is how do we create a different delivery model? So things like telemedicine, where it goes and the information becomes more accessible to the actual providers, because they don't know the tests, the medicines that I've been asked to take. People here say, why are you doing this? Mm-hmm. So it's a big knowledge gap.
Well, if this is the beginning of the journey for someone, or they've hit a wall and said, where I'm going is not working. I know for a long time the name was Dr. David Bell, and he retired about a dozen years ago. Nothing has filled that gap.
No, that's an incredibly good point. It's very difficult to, I think we counted up, like I saw 18 doctors. And you have so many different things wrong with you that you really have to see specialists in, different areas, but some were very, obviously thought there was a biological process going on. They just didn't really know much about it. And so I can't imagine where I would be today if I hadn't gone for specialist care out of the state, which is not realistic. In fact, this year I wasn't able to go because I haven't been well enough to be able to travel.
Well, in our time together, let's focus on the studies and the work that is being done. Where does your work stand? I know you said you're not advertising, but are you looking for more folks to study? Is there things that this community can help? Is there developments that we can look for from you?
Yes, well, good question. We're getting close to starting data collection for the NIH-funded center that Maureen has at Cornell. And so we will be advertising for control subjects, healthy and active control subjects, as well as patients too. And certainly there's a time commitment and an effort commitment involved with that. But I think probably the easiest way is to connect through Maureen's website.
Yes, yeah, I'd just like to say, if you'd like to learn more about our center, you can go to neuroimmune.cornell.edu. And there's a description on that website of the projects that we are either currently carrying out or plan to carry out. There's also information there about how to volunteer for this study. There'll be more information shortly because as Betsy mentioned, we're going to be starting to do some recruitment. And we need healthy controls who are not active. We don't want marathon runners, but we as well as patients. So keep an eye on that website, and also you can learn a lot about what's happening. We also have a news part of the website where there's some talks that I've given posted there, and you can watch those talks to learn more information about our studies that we're doing. And did you have a question?
I was actually curious if you could just repeat what you mentioned on the website, and then also the book that you mentioned.
Okay, so it's NeuroImmune, so like neurology, neuroimmune.cornell.edu, and that will get you to that website. You can also Google me, and you will probably find that if you Google me at my name at Cornell, and I guess it's here. You can probably find the website that way as well.
Thank you.
In your book?
Yeah, it was called How to Be Sick by Tony Bernard.
Thank you.
It deals with any chronic illness, really.
Encouraging to hear as well that Rochester Regional, and I know you're faculty at RIT as well.
That's correct.
This is something that's being talked about in the offices and a focus. How much of a focus is that of your work? And again, are you looking for help?
In this funding climate, we're always looking for help. But I think it's fair to say, I mean, I was introduced to this illness in 2004, 2005. And we've been through some really tough funding terrain, and so I think we're in it for the long haul. We're very committed to this patient population. I think we have a different approach, one that's that complements very well the work of Dr. Hanson and Dr. Keller and other specialties in both the life sciences and the clinical sciences, because we're integrators. So we really are connecting dots. That's what we do. We're trying to connect dots, and we're using large computers to do it. And if we connect enough dots, we can start asking questions of the computer and say, look, you were able to reproduce this illness, you're able to behave like an ME/CFS patient or some ME/CFS patients. What can I do now on these computers to make you feel better? And that's essentially what we're doing, is we're using large computers to do that. We're very excited to be right down the road from Dr. Hanson and Dr. Keller and their efforts. But certainly all of the data that is being generated, we then cast into this computer model. And so we're essentially collecting the thoughts and interpretations and data of labs across the US and across the world. And we're trying to put that into what we understand about human physiology and really paint a very accurate picture of human physiology and the way it can fall into this type of dysfunction. And if we understand that, then we can reverse engineer how to get people back. Right now, we've been in our new facility for about 8 months. Rochester Regional Health has been they've been very kind to us. They've given us basically everything we wanted and some. So they've been very supportive of this mission, and which is refreshing, very refreshing. So we are continuing our work on that, and we've been able to tap into some very bright kids. I mean, our first and best resource is people in the line of work that we do. I mean, computers we can find. People are really our best resource, and we've tapped into RIT in a major way. They have a very good co-op program, and they have a variety of specialties in life sciences and the engineering sciences that because we work across those two domains, we bring those kids in and sit them together. So we sit a bioinformatics person with a genomicist, a genomics student with a control engineer. And it's almost like the punchline on a joke, right? I mean, but the way these kids then look at the problem across these different domains, and each from their different perspective, it still takes my breath away at how impactful it is and how strong it is. And I think it's fair to say in the past year we started exploring this idea of dysregulation between the different endocrine and immune axes. With small models, just as a proof of concept, and it was successful enough that it actually it basically was proven true, or at least partially proven true, in animal models conducted by the CDC in Gulf War illness. So in another illness that is also very complex, that also involves multiple areas of dysfunction. And so that suggested to us that maybe this approach has some merit to it. And so we have now continued in parallel working on ME/CFS. The work that we did in Gulf War illness was mainly on male physiology. And so we put some effort into that. Now in the past year, we've put a tremendous amount of time and effort on modeling female physiology and the interactions between the immune system and the hormonal programming in female subjects. And that's a little more daunting. Women are Ferraris, men are Volkswagens. We went with the Volkswagen first, and we kind of figured out how to work the Volkswagen, and now we're tinkering with the Ferrari, and I think we're at a point now where we've actually also broken through several barriers at the level of computation. These are mathematically, they're very complex problems. We are complex beasts, and so we've reached a point though with the collaborators at Colorado State University that we're able to handle very large networks that connect different cell types, different proteins within those cells, and all the way down into the pathways. So we now have the ability to look at very large models, and actually we are already testing out some of those more complex models that capture sex hormone regulation in women, stress hormone regulation in women, metabolic hormone regulation in women, and immune oversight of those and interaction with those different systems. This week, we've actually been running these on large computers to see how that understanding of the physiology can match with the experimental data that we've been collecting and other groups have been collecting. And and we've actually reached a preliminary convergence of that, so preliminary match. And this is a moving target. Obviously, the more information, the more data, the more observations are being put into it, the smarter it becomes. But we at least have an initial start now, and so we're going to be testing how to find the way home, how to get ET to phone home. And so that's underway, but we can always use the help. Certainly we can use the help. We've had conversations with our development officers at Rochester Regional Health, and so there's opportunities there. I think it would be a really great idea to show Unrest to a clinician population at the hospital in which they work as an educational. I don't think people in fact, even I wasn't really fully immersed in the level of suffering that is out there.
That's what I wanted to ask. Some folks are here for CME credit, and thanks to those for you who there are. Do you have advice for them when these patients come? And because again, there's not many resources, not many outlets. So you'd say to someone, "This is what you may or may not have. I don't know where to send you for a test.
Exactly.
I can't give you to a specialist." What should medical professionals do in this room?
And I think that was part of the vision in bringing our lab to Rochester Regional Health, and the CEO is very much seeing us as part of as building a translational engine, basically within the network. So people have emailed me. I don't know where to send them other than to Cindy Bateman, Dan Peterson, Nancy Carnes, Maria Vera, the people that I've been working with really for a decade now.
Is Nancy still in Florida?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said some other names.
Cindy Bateman.
Okay, where's she?
In Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay.
And so Suzanne Vernon actually is working with Cindy Bateman. So Suzanne Vernon, who was at the CDC, who's a virologist, PhD virologist, is now working with Cindy Bateman in Utah at the Bateman Horn Center. So that's another resource. Obviously, the Montoya Clinic at Stanford is another important resource. Dr. Levine, these are the only people that I know of to send to. But I think the point that you brought up about local resources is incredibly important, and I think Nancy would be the first one to agree with that. Is that she's desperate to train new physicians, new clinicians, new first-line care providers that are able to recognize the illness for what it is, an illness, and also basically spread that knowledge. And I think it's coming, but certainly that's a huge need is to train those first-line care providers.
We have just a few moments left together. We've covered a lot, and maybe there's no more to say on this conversation, at least in front of these tables, but if there's any last piece of advice or encouragement or anything you'd like to give in our last few minutes together, if anyone wants to, they're welcome to.
There was a question here. Did you want to ask?
Well, I'm very fascinated with what you're doing with these computers, and I was wondering about the amounts of data that's being gathered and putting into these computers. There's got to be some sort of filtering or weighing of the data that is more valuable than other data, and data that, as you said, there's false information out there. How does it get sorted, and where do you find the best data?
Well, because and that's a really good question. It's a really, really good question, and it's a question about how do you validate a piece of data. And I think one of the way we're approaching it is that it has to mesh with the other pieces, right? So what you observe at the cellular level, you should have repercussions in the way cells speak to one another. And if you don't observe those repercussions, then you would have to bring into question the disconnect. Why is it not meshing with all the other pieces? It's almost like getting a new puzzle piece, and it's 2 times bigger than any other puzzle piece that you have on your desk. So it's never going to fit into these other pieces. So that's not a piece of data that we would throw out, but we would certainly flag it as being questionable. And so we do have the ability to give different credibility ratings or different fitness ratings to these different pieces of data. And sometimes a bad fit is actually a good thing, because it forces you to think, well, why doesn't it fit with the other pieces? What are we not thinking about? What do we not have in the puzzle that would allow it, that would explain it, that would allow it to fit? And so, you have to be careful to not get stuck in what you know, and just, force everything into that model. You have to be open to the fact that, somebody comes up to you with something new that doesn't fit with your model of thinking, that you shouldn't discard it outright. Definitely, you should bring it into question. You could scrutinize it more than a piece that would just automatically fit into your current model. But those outliers are opportunities to learn. And I think you learn more from the outliers to your model than you do necessarily from them, because they represent the things that you don't know, or you don't know yet. Yes, they could be errors. Sometimes they are, but in a lot of cases, they aren't, because the basic safeguards have been put in place and the basic quality control measures have been put in place. So they are valuable data points. They just don't fit with our understanding of the illness. So they're opportunities to actually expand our knowledge.
That's something you have to incorporate all the times to have, like, when you get an output on a model, it's reliable.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And in terms of reinforcing that even further, we draw on different types of knowledge. So it's not just numerical data. It can be clinical observations. And we've started doing in the past 18 months an awful lot of text mining. So we have the ability, and we have a very good relationship now with Elsevier. They do a lot of knowledge engineering and text mining, and they've allowed us privileged access to their corpus of over 4 million scientific journal papers. And we now are working with them through their affiliation with Carnegie Mellon to have computers read these papers and interpret them and tell us what some of the connections might be. And so by drawing on these different types of knowledge, we can then look for inconsistencies in those reports and flag them.
I imagine there is a lot of follow-up, and perhaps our experts might be able to stay. Perhaps I don't want to promise anything and maybe answer some of them, but unfortunately our time in this room is quickly running out. So I want to repeat that website again, neuroimmune.cornell.edu. And some of you had asked us to repeat, so that is exciting. And just a big thank you to our panel today for the work you do.
And a big thank you to our moderator, Please stay, have conversation. We have our posters outside. Don't forget to take your pictures and post those on social media if you'd like. Thank you, everyone.
You're looking for Betsy Keller, right?
Oh, well, it's too late now.
Is it?